From CPRE and the CPRE Knowledge Hub, this is Research Minutes, a weekly look at new and important research in education. Today, we look at the perceptions and experiences of Black math teachers and the factors that can lead them to consider leaving the profession.
Quite frankly, there are just not that many large-scale surveys done on Black math teachers. So we wanted to take this opportunity to ask as many things as possible, try to capture as many experiences, as many thoughts, as many emotions as we possibly could.
We welcome George Mason University researchers Toya Jones-Frank and Marvin Powell, co-authors of a new study surveying hundreds of educators across the U.S. They share what they have learned so far.
We did find that Black teachers saw their negative experiences with race via microaggressions as a huge factor in their decision to want to leave the field.
And some valuable takeaways for stakeholders at all levels of the education system.
What kinds of climates are being fostered? Is there attention to anti-racism in the building? Have issues of race come up in how teachers are evaluated, in how teachers are assigned to courses, in how teachers are assigned to handle discipline? These are all places where districts and school leaders can work together.
That's right now on Research Minutes. Hello and welcome to Research Minutes. I'm Keith Heumiller, Managing Editor of the CPRE Knowledge Hub. Today, we're happy to be speaking with Toya Jones-Frank, Associate Professor with the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University. Thanks for joining us, Toya.
Thanks for having me.
We're also speaking with Marvin Powell, Assistant Professor and a colleague of Toya's in the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University. It's great to have you, Marvin.
Well, thank you, Keith. Happy to be here.
So today we're going to be discussing your new study, which you co-authored with Janice View, Christina Lee, Jay Bradley, and Asia Williams, titled Exploring Racialized Factors to Understand Why Black Mathematics Teachers Consider Leaving the Profession. It was just published in the journal Educational Researcher, and it takes a comprehensive look at how factors like racism and microaggressions can contribute to higher levels of attrition among Black math teachers. To start, could you tell us what drew you to this line of work? Was there previous research or possibly a lack of previous research that led your team to investigate these issues?
Sure. First, I'd just like to say thanks so much for having us today. We're really excited both about this paper and the opportunity to share a little bit and chat with you today. But this work, I would say, is, probably over a decade in the making. So I am an African-American former mathematics teacher. I was a high school math teacher for about 11 years before I went back to graduate school, and a math department chair. And so some of my interest comes from lived experience, but also a lot of this work began for me, the research side of this work, began when I was a doctoral student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I was a student in the Center for Mathematics Education. And at the time, we had a project going about highly respected algebra teachers. And all of the teachers who were nominated for the study happened to be African American. And it took us down this interesting path of thinking about the intersection of race and mathematics teaching. There's certainly lots of work around race and mathematics instruction for students, but thinking about race and racism with respect to mathematics teaching hadn't quite been explored. And so I think it's important to note that we are already talking about a hard to staff field, mathematics. It's highly assessed and it's a hard to staff field with a high rate of turnover. But within that, African-American Black teachers have the highest rate of turnover. So just from a researcher's perspective, we think that it's important to investigate this, because if we can gain a better understanding of what is happening with teachers who have the highest rate of turnover, then perhaps the implications for this group of teachers will impact and improve teaching conditions for all teachers. And I am especially thankful that when I got to George Mason, I met my colleague, Dr. Janice View, who is a social studies educator and an oral historian. And I was telling her about my work because we also are doing work around African American math teachers from a historical perspective. And she strongly encouraged me to pursue funding. And so the paper that we're going to talk about today comes out of a larger National Science Foundation study called Examining the Trajectories of Black Math Teachers. We take a past, present, future approach to looking at this issue. So starting with really around the time of Brown, when there wasn't necessarily a shortage of Black teachers, but we look at how desegregation had an impact on Black teachers in public schools. And so we would argue that we can't talk teacher shortage and attrition without looking at Black teachers from a historical perspective. And so, in a nutshell, that's sort of a quick synopsis of how I've come to do this work. And then we happened to meet Dr. Powell, Marvin Powell. He joined faculty, and I always tell people I have the best methodologist in the world. He's been invaluable to the project, along with our wonderful doc students who you mentioned earlier.
And for this study, your team actually designed and administered a new tool, which you call the Black Teachers of Mathematics Perception Survey. Could you walk us through what that is and how you administered it?
That tool, it's an interesting development of it. Like Toya just mentioned, we're looking at from a survey perspective for the larger study, and we wanted to administrate nationwide. So we wanted to take this opportunity to ask as many things as possible, try to capture as many experiences, as many thoughts, as many emotions as we possibly could from these teachers, because quite frankly, there are just not that many large-scale surveys done on Black math teachers. So we wanted to seize that opportunity to capture as many things. So we went wide. We developed some specific items. We followed research from colleagues and others to try to incorporate items that looks at, let's say, microaggression. And we started with, I think, 28 items for that microaggression scale that we ended up narrowing to 16 and then later 13, which we also in another paper, hopefully we can talk about that another time, talk more specifically how we created that microaggression scale. But in this larger BTOMS, the Black Teachers of Mathematics Perception Survey, we included items that were drawn from the School of Staffing Survey. Items such as, in this school, staff members are recognized for a job well done. And other items that we're looking at, whether teachers thought about leaving the profession. For example, lack of administrative support makes me think about leaving the profession. So we developed this large, when I say large, Keith, I'm talking about a really large item pool. And we ended up with a fairly sizable 25 to 30-minute survey that looks at a wide range of things like microaggression, their thoughts about leaving the profession, their satisfaction with their current teaching environment situation, and some school-related and staff-related items.
Right. And we also asked some questions related to instruction and pedagogy as well. So we also drew on a survey that was developed at the University of Maryland that looked at teachers' understandings of students' mathematical dispositions. We have questions about the nature of mathematics, and we also have questions around culturally relevant pedagogy that we added. And so we worked with professional organizations like the Benjamin Banneker Association, which is an affiliate of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They were key to helping us recruit. We had several school districts send out our flyer for us. We recruited at annual meetings for math teachers. So one year we took flyers and we recruited at the National Council for Teachers of Math annual meeting the year that they were in DC. But we also had a huge social media push. And I would say that it's probably where the majority of our teachers found out about us. So yeah, social media was key.
So let's jump into your findings, beginning with your first research question. What did you learn about the effects of personal and school climate factors on Black mathematics teachers and how they viewed leaving the profession?
So first, before we jump into that, Richard Ingersoll and Henry May wrote a paper, I believe 2011, where they focus on science and math teachers' turnover rate. And what they included were some school-based factors as well as some personal factors. So we decided to emulate that in the sense of looking at these factors that researchers have already found to be impacting retention or turnover in that case. So we included some of these personal factors such as age and their sex, their salary, and the type of school that they attend. We also included whether they have access to resources, what are those resources that they have access to, and whether or not they felt that level of school support from leadership. So we included those variables in that first model to try to see whether or not these variables, as identified by previous research, are contributing to Black math teachers' contemplation of leaving the profession. And we found school resources and support were not. Actually, in this particular model, we found only age and teacher salary that were significant predictors in teachers wanting to leave the profession. So younger teachers were less likely to want to leave the profession, which is interesting. And also teacher salary. Higher earning teachers were more likely to want to leave the profession, according to this.
You also investigated the impact of racialized experiences, which were over and above those personal and school climate factors we were just discussing, on teachers and how they viewed their careers. What'd you learn there?
Sure. So, also drawing on Ingersoll and May's work, they had another paper come out about teachers of color and thinking about organizational factors that impacted teacher attrition. And so in the paper, we think a lot about, and we discussed this quote that was in the paper about the need to do more work to perhaps understand factors that were impacting teachers of color because their data did not necessarily look like or behave like the data for white teachers. And so, given our team and our orientation to research, and we started thinking about, so we are Black and African American educators, and we think about the things that impact our day to day work. And so we started hypothesizing, drawing on critical race theory, and just thinking about the persistence of racism and how it's just interwoven into society. And so, by extension, we would argue that it is also interwoven into education. And we think a lot about students' experiences of race. And we wanted to think about teachers' experiences of race and racism. So we did find that teachers' experiences of racialized microaggressions from that BTOMP survey, the smaller, the scale in there, the teachers' experiences of racialized microaggression scale, helped us to better understand that Black teachers saw their negative experiences with race via microaggressions as a huge factor in their decision to want to leave the field. This racialized microaggressions variable explained a lot of variance in our model, and it was statistically significant. And so, there's lots of qualitative research that would tell us that, but as a researcher, we are excited to have, this sort of finding. But then, as people, we also find it disheartening because we have experienced some of the things that our participants have shared with us through the survey. And we also have another piece of the work where we do qualitative focus groups where teachers reflect on this data. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but having such a large corpus of data, being able to quantify this shared experience for us was really, really powerful. And so for us, we believe that it substantiates a lot of the qualitative literature that is out there. We draw on a piece by a researcher by the last name Brown. She does a beautiful job of laying out various types of microaggressions that Black teachers experience. And drawing on that work helped us to better make sense of our data when we started doing our analysis.
Just to give you guys a little bit more context, one of the items from the microaggression scale is I've experienced feeling of isolation at my school and our district based on my race. So when Toya speaks about the microaggressive variable over and above the other variables that we've tested is contributing a lot, let me try to give some additional perspective to that. All the variables that we've included in the model, we're accounting for roughly 10% of the variance in teachers leaving the profession. In other words, if we think of all of the things that could contribute to somebody's decision to leave the profession, 10% of that was due to these organizational variables that we mentioned, them, their salary, their age, what type of school they teach in, the support that they get from leadership, etc. We're saying, in addition to that, the microaggressive experiences that they've had is explaining 17% variance, 17% more variance to the 10% from all of those factors. I think it speaks volume to a variable that we have not paid enough attention to quantitatively.
Given your findings, I think that there's quite a few implications that we could take away from your work, but I'll leave that to you. What recommendations or takeaways would you offer to districts, school leaders, policymakers, or even teacher preparation programs that want to address the issues that you've surfaced in this work and to retain Black teachers and more effectively support them throughout their careers?
Sure. So I'll talk about each group separately. So there's a lot of work at the recruitment end. And so we know of programs where, there's like Call Me Mr. program, or we know that there are programs like Teach for America that have like a branch that really reaches out to HBCUs. So thinking about teacher diversity is a very popular idea right now, but I find that a lot of the work lies at the recruitment end, and not that there can't be more work at that end, because we have colleagues who would say a wonderful paper that came out a few years ago that would say, even when we put the emphasis at the recruitment end, Black teachers are still not recruited into districts at the same rates as other teachers, even other teachers of color. So there's still more work to be done there. But I think the districts need to put more emphasis on the retention end. And so I'm going to connect this district piece to school leaders. So for us, this work has implications for school climate. What kinds of climates are being fostered? Is there attention to anti-racism in the building? Have issues of race come up in how teachers are evaluated, in how teachers are assigned to courses, in how teachers are assigned to handle discipline? These are all places where districts and school leaders can work together to ensure that, Black teachers are not given predominantly low-level assignments, because data would tell us, my colleague Basola Neal looked with respect to mathematics teachers, Black mathematics teachers are overwhelmingly represented in low-level mathematics teaching. Only about maybe 3% of calculus teachers are Black. So again, looking at course assignments, looking at things like, have we looked at perhaps inherent bias in our evaluation tools? I have seen teachers offer beautiful mathematics lessons, right? Because I work in a college of education and I prepare students to go out and teach secondary mathematics. And so I've seen teachers give beautiful lessons. And then once the lesson is over, I've had school administrators or a mentor teacher say, the lesson was great, but this teacher should perhaps work on the ways that they talk to their students. And I'm like, perhaps, or you're missing the shared cultural experiences and you're missing the cultural nuance of what's happening between this Black teacher and these Black students. And they are drawing on these shared cultural experiences, and they're using those as a leverage to, increase mathematics understanding and to build conceptual understanding in mathematics classes. So I think working with districts, working with school leadership to understand those things is really, really important. And I think teacher preparation programs, because I am a teacher educator, I think that there are just ways that we can reimagine teacher education. So most of the work, particularly work around equity and diversity and multiculturalism, it is written where the audience is typically white female students, and it's about how to work with other communities. But I think if we think about how we center Black students and students of color, they're going to have different experiences. You're talking about students who perhaps are either going to go into schools where they are going to be one of a few people of color, or they're going to go into schools where they have shared identities with their students. And so the things that students need with respect to diversity, multicultural education, anti-racist education, their needs are perhaps different. What we've learned from even the qualitative work that branches out from this is that we also have to take a critical look at the mathematics that we teach and the inherent cultural biases that are within the math that we teach. So whose math knowledge counts? Whose math is credited as being canonical? These are all things that teachers have shared with us about how race plays out in their mathematics teaching. Even just thinking about how often when we talk about achievement, Danny Martin would say that African American Black students often find themselves at the lowest rung of the achievement hierarchy, if we were going to put students into a particular hierarchy according to achievement. Well, we have to think about it. Pre-service teachers are, placed on these hierarchies, right? And so how do they navigate these identities that are like put upon them as they enter into the world of teaching? So these are all things that I think teacher educators could be cognizant of. But ultimately, it is just my hope that people put more emphasis on this idea that thinking about race and racism as an organizational factor just becomes a larger part of our conversation.
You had mentioned earlier that this work is part of a larger study, which we look forward to seeing more of down the road. But I'm curious if you think that there are other opportunities here for future research, not only for your team, but maybe others who are trying to investigate the experiences of Black educators in America.
We believe that this is merely scratching the surface of where we could go, not just as our team, but research in general, on several fronts. Let's start from a methodological front because, that's what I do. We feel that for too long, we have not focused on quantitative research through a critical lens. We've often just taken numbers as gospel, or we've taken numbers as this is right because it's a number without offering some form of critical thought to it. So we do hope that from this, people are encouraged to go look at numbers more critically, using critical race theory as that lens, that guide, or any critical theory for that matter, as some form of lens that guide their understanding of quantitative data or quantitative results. As a team, we've also questioned how well do these results, or will these results, can we extrapolate these results to all Black teachers, not just Black teachers of mathematics, right? In the Ingersoll and May, they focus on science teachers as well. So, we've had thoughts of, let's expand this beyond the math realm. Let's look at other subject areas and see whether or not there are differences here. We have our thought that it might end up being the same thing in terms of the same types of results that we find, but we don't know yet until we research them. So that's an open basket because there's so many subject areas where Black teachers are not underrepresented, but certainly not given that level of recognition that they're excelling in those areas as well.
So for us, it was really important from this critical lens to sort of complicate or to think about the complexity of identity. And so for us, even in the survey, when we ask people, how do you identify yourself? It's just not blanket Black, right? So we are like, do you see yourself as African American, Afro-Latino, Caribbean? Lots of different choices, multiracial, etc. And so I would love to see us administer this again and deepen our data set with a wider sample of teachers from different sample of Black teachers from across the diaspora would be really nice. And then I think there's lots of qualitative work to do. So I'd mentioned that we shared lots of the findings from our quantitative work with teachers. And so they have had some really powerful responses to the data. And so I think doing more on the qualitative side, thinking through this data with teachers, using it to do more research with administrators. We did not set out initially to write policy papers, but now that I am in the throes of the work, I'm like, how could I not see this initially as policy work? And so thinking about what this work means in the larger teacher diversity conversations, I think is important. So I would like to see us do more on the policy and practice side.
Well, we will certainly be watching for more work from your team down the road. But the work that we've been discussing here today, this study is just incredible, and we want to encourage our listeners to go and read the full article. Again, it's titled Exploring Racialized Factors to Understand Why Black Mathematics Teachers consider leaving the profession, and it was recently published in the journal Educational Researcher. Toya Frank and Marvin Powell, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's Research Minutes, presented by the CPRE Knowledge Hub. For more episodes or to subscribe to the series, you can find us at researchminutes.org. To share thoughts on today's episode, or to suggest a future topic, you can follow us on Twitter at CPRE Hub. That's CPRE Hub.